So I've been remote working I left my corporate job in 2002, 2003. That was Sun Microsystems, which obviously don't exist anymore.
Hmm.
Not in the way they used to anyway, I guess, as
Right.
the shadow of their former self. And so I, I sold the little web app that I made then, and I worked for that company for a little bit, but it was pretty much, there was an office in a cool part of London, and it was going, if you want to hang in London. It was there was the owner of the company lived like a few minutes walk away from the office, and it was like a 4-person, 5-person, and we kind of just went to the office if we felt like it. And so I think from that moment on, I've never been an office person. I just
Hmm.
haven't. Either it's been I go in because I want some social interactivity, or there's something that we need to talk about together. It's just easier, especially video conferencing wasn't really as good, or didn't really exist in the same way back then. And there was the previous job I had here was there was the first time since then that I've actually been like daily going into an office, and took some getting used to. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing is for remote working is a company they have to buy into it like big time, not a dip in their toes in and say, well, it's not really working. You've either got to commit to it and change your working practices to take it remote first, or you know there's got to be a definite goal in mind rather than just seeing what happens, whether that's like a hybrid goal or some kind of flexible system, but it has to be a stated thing that you want to make work, rather than just, oh well, it didn't work out right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So for now, I'm having to commute a couple of days a week, and next week it's gonna be 3 days a week. And so, yeah, I don't think they are planning
Hmm.
to fully support remote work
Right.
for now, even though they've had a long time to evaluate it and to see the effectiveness, because work has gotten done.
Right.
Everyone's
Yeah.
been working, and it hasn't really made that much of a difference. And certainly specifically for certain types of jobs, certain roles, right, that make it super easy to just do the work remotely. You don't have to be in the office. But they're not even differentiating that. They're throwing a blanket statement, and everyone has to come into the
Right.
office eventually.
Mm.
So I'm working on that, though. I'm actively looking for a different role somewhere else, and I'm not planning on staying there for a very long time.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
it's
I've been there for a long time
right.
already, so
Right.
it's time to move
You
on.
there's no unknowns there. You know what will happen, kind of thing. You can make very strong predictions about how they're dealing with this, right? So
Yep, yep.
yeah, I
And
mean,
so I can.
sorry, I saw on the news about Apple saying that that it's like we will not be becoming a remote first company, right? Pretty much. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a strange one, because I guess they've just spent all of this money on that campus, that gorgeous building, and
Yeah.
I can't blame them if I'd spent all that on that. And I think Apple has such a distinct culture goal there that it's sad in one way that they seem to not be willing to find some medium.
Mm.
But if I lived close, I'd probably want to go into that office too. There's probably a strong desire to go there if I was there, because the facilities and things are somewhat different. Once you've tasted the flexibility of remote work, even if it's hybrid or whatever, then it's really difficult to go back to thinking that you have to be in a particular place at a particular time so many days a week. It's like, what? It always kills me that I don't know how people get things done, because how do they? It's yeah. When I was started going into the office again every day as a real job, I guess I don't know how all of the things that I was doing. I don't know when I'm supposed to do them anymore, because they just slot into natural ebbs and flows of your day. But to be
Hmm.
put on the spot and say, no, you will be here a particular time to do a particular thing, it's like, but what if I don't want to do that? Or what if it's not the right
Yeah.
time for me to do that? Right? It felt
Yeah.
such a, I guess if you've always done that, that's normal and you don't question it so much. But when you've not done it for so long, and then someone's put in this position, it's like, why?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can understand if a certain role requires that you are physically present at a location, right? And I can see Apple, for example, they build hardware, right?
Yes.
They design hardware. So I can imagine that's, you can't do all of that remotely 100%. You have
Right.
to be present. And I don't even know what, kind of work it requires to do that. I mean, I can imagine, but I can only imagine that you cannot be 100% remote
Right.
if your role is, you know, designing hardware and testing things and working with hardware.
Right.
But there are certain roles that, you know, lend themselves to be remote. If you're just writing software and you're just, coding all the time, I mean, why not? You can be anywhere.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
meetings are conducted virtually anyways,
right.
especially nowadays.
Yeah, we kind of got used to that. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
necessarily optimal, and I
Yeah.
think there's still a lot of learning to be done with regards to how we approach online meetings and things. So, but again, that's one of the things I want to try and solve with dotplan, or at least provide an alternative that is it offers different types of benefits. I mean, the the big goal for dotplan for me was to try to reproduce the serendipity that happens in an office. And I think that was a big shock for me about returning to office life was there's a lot that you miss by being completely remote. And I didn't realize that so much before I went back to it. And just people talking on a phone call on the other side of the office, you pick up things and you're like, are we working with them? Hold
Yeah.
on, who's doing that? And I should probably be involved because I know something about that, but because you weren't involved with it, sometimes it's not known. Or you, again, if you're talking to somebody about a technology, somebody across the other side of the office is like, hold on, I know about that. And that just gets lost often in remote work because everybody is doing their thing. And unless it's assigned to you, or unless it's made explicit that we're looking into a thing, then you just don't know about it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
that. So the previous company that I spent like 6 or 7 years working for remotely, I three of the staff at a conference, but the rest of them, the other 30 something people I never met. I never even spoke to the majority of them. It was purely text based communication. And it's great. I had some really good friends there, and it was probably the best working environment that I've ever had in terms of trust and understanding between each other. But there was a lot of serendipity lost there because you just don't know what's going on. And unless you become communicative in a particular way, you just disappear into the background.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole premise of me starting dotplan was I want to be able to make it easy for people to share what they're working on, what's going on, without making it like formal, without me writing a report saying we are thinking about this thing and if anybody has any input, please do. It's like, well, I'm looking at this, and then people can, hold on, that's interesting to me. So I wanted to try to form a different way of that serendipitous communication, that like
Mm-hmm.
in non-direct. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just like
Right. Indirect.
indirect, yes,
Indirect.
yes,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
non-explicit. So
Yeah.
there's still some ways to go, but it's interesting with it kind of skipping all over the place today. But we had some communication with one of the beta users here in Fukuoka, and
Mm-hmm.
his explicit reason for wanting to try using dotplan was he wasn't didn't feel on top of what his staff were doing. And it's like, well, that's exactly what we're trying to solve here. So I don't want to say hesitant, but he was somewhat unconvinced when we started the trial. He's like, I'm happy to try it because I want to solve this. I want to make this better. I don't know if what you're doing is the answer, but I'm happy to try it to see what happens. His big worry was that his staff wouldn't do this, or they would take it with, begrudgingly do it rather than buy into it. And so we were talking to him about a feature that we're trialing with him, only him, because he had a specific request. And I'm like, I'm not sure if this is this needs to be part of the product in the future, but I'm willing to give it a go and see how it fits in. So it's this small feature that I added for him, and it's just behind a feature flag so he can use it. And so he said, well, how's the other thing? And he's like, oh, that's great. That's almost like not a problem anymore. I'm
Right.
more interested in this new feature. And the fact that the dot plan is providing the benefit and it's solving that problem that he had already. He's already thinking about the next challenges. And that was a big like, oh, hold on. The fact that he's now reliant on this, the company has kind of accepted this. This is just part of the way they work now. Was like, oh wow, it's weird because you're now looking at the next problems and he's almost like skipping ahead. Oh, it would be better if we could do this. And it's like, yeah, hold on, got to convince everybody else of this first step first. So that
That's
was,
nice.
yeah, absolutely. It was really like validating. It felt very reassuring to think that, especially someone who was hesitant and unconvinced to start off with, and especially he was like, yeah, it's going to be like pulling teeth getting my staff to do this, but they're doing it and they seem to have. So the next step is we're trying to arrange another meeting to go in and talk to him in person and hopefully try and get his staff's feedback as well, because it's great if it solves his problem. I want to know how the staff feel about it now. That's like the next thing we need to understand. So it's like, it's great if he's happy, but the staff happy as well. So that's, yeah, it felt really good to get that, just that validation of like, yeah, of course it's working. So that was exciting. That was a good bit of news this week.
That's awesome. Can you describe the feature? Are you at a
The
point where
feature
you can talk?
that we've built for him? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
It's pretty simple. It's a time tracker. It's a time card system. So Japan, I may have mentioned this before, but Japan has a labor law rule that if you're earning less than 10 million yen, if it's an office job, if you earn less than 10 million yen per year, 100K, and you're not a director level employee, then you have to keep time cards.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned
I think
that.
I mentioned it,
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's to stop overwork and stop people being taken advantage of in terms of their office hours. And he's like, they currently have a complicated system with like, there's a clock-in machine, there's people making notes of things, there's people writing messages in like a Slack type thing. Yeah, I'm starting work, I'm stopping work. And he's like, this takes a lot of time to aggregate this. There's got to be something you can... And because the way they're using dotplan is, I think I mentioned this before, but again, different people seem to be using it in different ways. And I'm trying to now figure out what's the what right way, right? It works differently for different people, works well in different ways for different people. But the way they're doing it is they're doing a morning and an evening check-in. So first thing in the morning, they say, this is what I plan to do. And then in the evening, this is what I've achieved. I'll come back to an interesting point about that in a second, but that's what they're doing and that works well. So it's like, well, can't we just say I'm starting work and then I'm stopping work and record those times, and that gives us a recorded list of when people start and stopped work. Can we use that? And I'm like, well, that you don't necessarily want to tie that to an official clock in and clock out, but there's certainly overlap there between the systems, right? And I'm like, I didn't want to build a time tracking system, to be honest. That was like almost like the opposite goal of dotplan. I wanted to produce something that didn't feel formal, didn't feel like something you had to do. It was more of getting a benefit from it. But at the same time, then I started thinking of the aspect, there's a lot of movement behind recording what you've done as a productivity and personal tracking kind of tool. Like, how long did I spend on that? And yourself, I started to try doing like time blocking just to try to control the amount of what I spent my time doing, because it's easy to either lose time on something that isn't important, or waste time on looking at Twitter, right? Or just working too much. That's the other thing as well. We've mentioned things about just being able to be aware of how much time you're spending. And I kind of came to this realization that it might be relevant, because if you're adding what you're working on, what you're doing, and what you've achieved, then being able to correlate this with some kind of time-based system, there could be personal benefits as well as corporate benefits, right?
Sure.
This is actually something I was going to maybe mention. Is I'm curious what you think about how you respond to people's request for features, because in this case, it's he said, well, I'd really like a time tracking system as part of this. And I'm like, this isn't what I want to build, right? I don't want to build a clock in and clock out system. This is not how I know remote working doesn't work well if I have to clock in at 8:30 in the morning and clock out at 6. But at the same time, the more I thought about it, I just let it bubble for quite a long time before agreeing to build it. I was
Yeah,
like, let me
yeah,
think about this. I don't want to commit before I understand the implications of this. But I also
sure.
didn't want to say no outright. My first reaction was, no, I'm not building that. And then before I, that was going on in my head, it's like, there's no way I'm going to build that. And so I just said, let me think about this for a while. And
Hmm.
and it took probably about a week for me to convince myself that there might be something in it. Um, and again, I don't know if it is, but I kind of decided that the spending X amount of time, again, a reasonable, I didn't want to just go down a rabbit hole and build out this fully featured thing, but I scoped a very tight version of this. And I'm like, okay, if I build this, is that useful to you? Yes, he said. I'm like, okay, it's very tightly scoped. It's not a full on, time tracking. It basically allows you to start and stop a timer, and either just a generic timer or one related to a project that exists in the system already.
Okay.
So, dotplan now, I'm moving to like the projects as being like a central part of how the interface works. And if you're a member of a project, you can effectively start a timer on a project and end the timer.
Hmm.
And that's it. And it just gives you a list of your times. The account owner can see everybody's times, and that's it. And
Okay.
so we turned that on for him this week. And so we will find out how useful that is to him. But just in using that for myself as well, I'm like, it doesn't feel too heavy. It's super lightweight, just lives in
Hmm.
the menu bar at the top. And I feel like I have this extra quantitative data about myself. Now, what I've been doing is like I can see the time I've spent, and it doesn't feel invasive. It doesn't feel like controlling or anything. It just feels informative for me. So
Okay.
I think there's something in it, and I don't know what that is yet, but it's been an interesting experiment to take somebody's request that I was not convinced about and just iterate on it and play with it. And I've got like so many sketches here of like, okay, how can I make this work that doesn't feel like I'm making a time tracking system, right? That's not what I'm doing, but how can I incorporate those aspects into this and make it feel part of the same product? And it's worked out well so far, I think. I say I'm still not 100% convinced, but I'm like 90% convinced now. So I'm curious to
Yeah.
know, like, so say for instance, someone comes to you with FusionCast and says, it would be great if it did this. And you're like, that's not on my roadmap at all. I'm not really interested in doing that. What would you do with that request?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky thing to consider those requests and give them weight, right? Give them relevance. I think the key thing is, I think you touched on that. The key is to have an idea of what your product needs to be, and some of these requests may align really nicely with your idea of the product, and some obviously will not align, at all. So I think if there's a way that you can mold or shape that idea or that suggestion in a way that it'll integrate into your system in a more seamless way, then you can do that. I handle this in a similar way. My first reaction is usually no
Yeah.
because I have an idea of what I want it to do. But as long as it's a request of a feature that is sort of related or tangentially related
Yeah,
to
it's
the
not a
core mission
completely
of my
different
product.
product, right? But it's
Exactly.
if it's kind of just out there a little bit. It's just a bit beyond the limits of where what you planned to do, right?
Yeah. For example, with the thing with FusionCast is that it's a recording tool, right? So I want to stay true to that and keep my course in that direction. And I don't want to deviate too much from that because I want to take care of one thing and hopefully do it well, right? It's just this one thing. It's a recording tool. It's not meant for editing. It's not an editing tool. It's not, So I've gotten requests where people suggest that maybe, if they could edit, with it
Automatically
too, and
upload to like distribution or something, right? I can
yeah, and
imagine
things
the,
like
the request, right?
yeah, exactly. And so it's not it's not an editing tool. So unfortunately I have to say no to those. But there are some other requests where even if it's not directly related to recording, but if in some way it enhances the experience of recording, then I can consider that and maybe implement it as suggested or shape it in a different way that kind of integrates better with my main mission. And I think that's kind of what you touched on earlier, where, okay, your first reaction was no, but then,
Completely.
okay, let me think about how I can kind of make it work and have that feature bring more value into your core mission
I mean, that's
value.
the interesting thing about this. By embracing something that, not embracing it, but giving it space to at least try to live. I've touched on something that I think could become kind of core.
Mm-hmm.
The especially this idea of this quantitative self of recording not just for other people what I'm doing, but also
Mm-hmm.
having the. I mean, even using dotplan for me, the company of me, is actually useful. Having this log of what I was doing last week and just seeing thought patterns appear in that is actually very interesting, and you can see your mood changes because mood tracking built in as well. So not just from a manager company a standpoint, but just from how am I doing? I can almost see the ebbs and flows in my own work. How
Mm-hmm.
much time did I spend on each project? And again, by doing this, I want to try some visualization of this, but I can already
Yeah.
see the patterns in the list of data
Mm-hmm.
of, hold on, I was really focused on this thing at this week or that period of time. And it'll be interesting to do some visualizations on it. So by seeing that it's not completely out there, it actually has some interesting side effects. It's paid off, I think. So I say I'm not 100% sure that it's going to exist in the same format it is right now, but I'm becoming
Mm-hmm.
more convinced that it is part of what dotplan is becoming. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
and again, when I started on dotplan, I had a reasonably strong idea of what I thought the product was. And it's really interesting to see how because it's, I guess in some ways, it's not a tightly defined, it's probably I think I've said this before as well, it's probably the wrong project to do as an indie hacker project, right? It should be super niche, like tightly scoped, something that, it has hard edges. But by kind of approaching something that is fuzzy and I've got an idea in this space, but it isn't strongly defined and typed, and it doesn't have hard edges. It has potentially long tendrils reaching out into other projects. It makes it tricky, but it also feels super rewarding to see where it goes because
Mm-hmm.
it's growing. I mean, the fact that projects weren't an integral part of my original plan, and it's become kind of core just by seeing how people use it and how I use it. And you can see
Mm-hmm.
these patterns coming out. And again, if I was a different type of person, I probably could have done this before I started coding. I mean, this is, I guess what service designers and user experience designers do, right? All of this would have been prototyped out and kind of worked with clients. But the easiest way for me to do and learn is to write code. I can write
Right.
code easier than I can draw on Figma, easier than, doing interviewing clients with prototypes. I'm like, well, I can build it for you and see how you use it. That's the
Yeah.
easiest way of learning for me. And
Sure.
I am sure other people will work differently, but it's been an interesting journey so far, and it's really interesting to see it's becoming clearer to me what it is, even though my initial, it's not far, but it's different from my original concept. It feels now like it is becoming much more in focus, and now it's
Yeah.
just a matter of like getting it perfectly in focus and building it out and building stuff which I now know needs building, when before I wasn't even aware that it needed to exist.
Yeah. And it sounds like you in analyzing the request and how the feature would work, you kind of broke it down to parts that, well, no, not parts, but you shaped it down to a way that it would work with what you have, what
Right.
the rest of your product.
Yes.
So it's not, so it doesn't become a whole other product. It's just an added feature that works well with the main purpose of your product,
Right,
right?
exactly. And I think that was, I also want to, by not committing to building a full on time tracking system, but what's the what does a time tracking system look like in the context of dotplan? And it did
Exactly.
took a good few weeks for me to figure that out, even at just a high level, sketch view. And then seeing it actually come in and just be there and it works, it's nice. It
Mhm.
feels good. So I'm kind of interested to see how this works out, just as it's been an interesting experiment for sure.
Yeah, sounds like it. That's awesome.
So how's FusionCast coming along anyway? What's been going on there?
So I haven't had any time to work on product. I need to. I think I talked about this the last time. I'm still working on other things besides the product itself. I'm getting a little impatient and I need to get back to working on the product itself. And so I think I'm going to be doing that this week, next week, the latest. I've been focusing on the marketing website. I got some feedback from some folks, and it was good feedback to improve the marketing site, to improve the message. So I've been working on that. And one of those things was to include a video, which I was planning to do. And we talked about that. So I finally spent some time recording a video for that. It's just a quick demo of how FusionCast works, from logging in, creating a podcast entry, creating a session, joining a session, have someone else, a guest, join, and just showcase real quick, backup recording in progress, local recording in progress. It's uploading at the same time, and that's it. And just showing the recordings that get generated from that quick session.
Nice.
It's about 3.5 minutes or so. I'm still editing a few parts here and there. It's almost ready to go. And as soon as I finish it, I'm going to update the website with that.
Right.
And I updated the copy a little bit on the website, a little bit of styling as well, just to make it a little more alive.
Okay.
One of the feedback that I got was that it was a little too grayish, kind of dull.
That was going to be my only response to it. Is it needs a bit of color in there. It needs to look.
Yeah.
I mean, it's especially with something like a podcast that you don't want it to feel like a boring corporate thing, right? The people who are recording podcasts are generally a bit more lively and upbeat, right? So you want to match that, right?
Yeah. So I did add a little bit of more color to it. Not a whole lot, but
not being a designer, color is. I mean, that's one of the reasons dotplan is blue and purple. Is it's difficult to make a massive mistake when it's all the same. Everything's indigo, right? And I experimented briefly with trying to do a dark theme, and I'm like, okay, I need to learn a few things before I venture into that world. Yeah, it's without having any design background, it's very easy to screw up with color, right?
Yeah. Dark mode presents unique challenges, and I've experimented with that a little bit with my own website. I created a dark theme. If your system is in dark mode, then my site renders in dark mode. But it's a really simple design. I didn't use that much color, and kept it really simple because it is challenging to have color on a dark mode theme.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even some of the big sites, like, I mean, GitHub now has a dark mode and stuff, and some things work well, and other things you're like, it feels off, right?
Yeah. They sometimes use these sort of neon colors on dark modes, on dark themes, and it doesn't look all that great. No. It looks really colorful, but it's a little too much,
Exactly. Yeah, there's a fine line. Well, that's actually one of the things I'm trying to add to dotplan at the moment. Is so at the moment the only place color is used outside of the purple is for your the default user icons, so you get a little circle. So I'm trying to add this as an identifier, a way of identifying visually projects from one another, because projects are becoming like a core aspect of the check-ins and things now. I want to try to tie colors to those too. So at the moment I'm just doing it as I wrote a thing which basically takes a string, does a hash, and you get a hue based on it. So you can set the saturation and hue, saturation, and
hue, saturation, and what is it? Contrast?
Yeah, maybe something like that. So I just vary the hue based on. So it always looks ish, right? Because it doesn't look too standout. It's just subtly enough that it looks colorful, but it doesn't look too out there, and then have it so you can just choose a different one later. But at the moment I'm just taking the ID and something else and creating a hash from it, using that to to seed to create a hue, and it's
Mm-hmm.
nice just actually suddenly having a bit of color appear on the screen in both tags and like the project view. It suddenly it makes it feel more, I don't know, real,
Yeah.
and it also, I feel like I'm my boring indigo and white, or rather gray 100 background has suddenly paid off because the colors all work. Having just colors, if I'd already gone with a strong opinionated color scheme for the rest of the project, it would be like, oh my god, someone just knocked over a box of Crayola, right?
Yeah.
But because everything is kind of bland to start off with, having just these little injections of color, actually I was pleasantly surprised how good it looked. I'm like, okay, this. I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I planned it, but I didn't. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, color can be tricky, and design as a whole is just a whole other feel, especially for us
right. Have
coders.
you read Adam's refactoring UI book?
I have the book. I haven't gone through most of it. I only started and did a little bit of it.
I read it when it first, yeah, when he first released it. So I should probably go back and reread it. But it's interesting how certain things of
Oh,
it.
wait. I'm sorry. No, I don't have it. I was thinking of Refactoring to Collections,
Oh right.
the
Ah okay.
older book that he
Ah
wrote. Not you're talking about the UI, yeah,
yeah, UI one.
design.
Okay, I
Yeah,
don't know that
yeah.
one.
No, I don't have that one.
It's highly recommended because again, I read it first when he first released it, and I found it again the other day. I was tidying up some file system, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And it's funny how certain things seem to have I have actually learnt it, as in things which he's mentioned. I'm like, I do that now. It just in
Yeah.
terms of there's one of the, I think it was very early on, simple thing about just using, as opposed to using text to as headers and things, as in like, title, project, and then I think using
Mm-hmm.
the colors, weight, and color as weight and layout to almost like state what this is and its relation to the item. I've been
Mm-hmm.
trying to do that a lot more, and I didn't realize that I was doing it, but it was just reading it. I just scanned through the file when I found it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I apparently I learned something there.
You
So
internalize
yeah,
that.
apparently so. But that just really stuck with me. That like, oh yeah, I'm labeling everything. Why am I labeling all of the fields when it's obvious when you weight things and you lay things out properly that you don't need the label, right? So that apparently stuck with me. So I feel there's a whole lot more that I should review in there and learn again. So it's again, I like the style of that, just in terms of the kind of like the, not cookbook, but a reference thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's just things to learn, not
Yeah.
like it's not a wordy, like novel. It's a read these things, internalize them, be a better designer. So
Yeah.
that resonates with me. I like that style. And if I
Very
was to write
pragmatic
another,
book.
yeah, exactly. If I was to write another book again, which I've said twice I would never do, and I ended up doing, but I'd really like to do something in that style that is something that you can refer to and spend 5 minutes looking through it, go, oh yeah, okay, I got something from it, and it's not, you don't have to sit down and work through it. It's just like something that you can pick up at any page and learn something. I like that style.
Yeah, color is, and design as a whole is a whole other world. And I've been trying to get better at that little by little. Every project, anything that I work on, I try to learn something new and apply it and improve in that side of things. But
So
still,
related to that also, do you use like Figma or a design tool to sketch, to design your layout before implementing it, or do you just do you use it designing code?
sometimes I use Figma and sometimes I don't. And I've been trying to use it even if I don't use, even if I don't do a lot in it, I at least start and kind of get an idea of what I want to do. And then I just jump right into the browser and just design in the browser, especially with Tailwind is a lot easier,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So if I'm working on a project for a client or, or something like that, or for work, I usually do go more in depth using Figma. But for my own stuff, I usually just start. I just start with something. And once I know I get an idea, then I just jump right into code.
Okay.
There's been times that I've spent more time on Figma just designing a small feature, like a subset of a page, like a row of items with buttons. And I just want to see how they line up and what spacing to use and what little icons to use as labels kind of thing, instead of words, just using icons and, that kind of stuff.
Right, right.
But yeah, I go back and forth between Figma and just designing in the browser.
Right. I guess my reason for asking is because I don't use Figma at all, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not comfortable or familiar enough with it. I tried using it a few weeks ago, and realized that I couldn't get it to do anything. And I'm like, okay, do I invest time to learn a prototyping tool, or I literally just write in Tailwind now? It's like, well, I know
Mm-hmm.
I need a box here, and it's this wide, and this things are going to go at this corner, and I just write it with Tailwind and from a sketch. So I'll just sketch on paper and then go, okay, I know kind of how this is going to work, and then visually I'll go, okay, that needs to be wider, this needs to be. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
only do go direct from a paper high level wiggly line sketch to code. And I'm wondering if I'm missing out on something. It's like, do I spend a few days becoming good with Figma? What will that make me in the end hopefully be faster and getting to a better design quicker, and then I'm just
Mm-hmm.
implementing the final design as opposed to fiddling, which is what I do currently. Is like, I'll get it working and then I'll spend far too much time fiddling with it to make
Yeah.
it look right. So I'm just curious as to whether I should invest the time in learning it.
I think it would be a good idea for you to invest some time to learn the tool a little bit. It can be useful. I guess it really depends on the feature or what it is that you're designing. Sometimes the color and the, icons and all that helps a lot to do it in a design tool
Right.
like Figma, and it saves you time.
Right.
But in other situations, it kind of slows you down a lot because depending on what it is that you're
Yeah,
working with.
I mean, I was just going to say that in previous company, yeah, our designs were effectively done by a designer in design, and then going from that, and it's like, okay, I know exactly what I need to implement, and then sometimes it's like, but I can't implement that based on the system we have currently. It's like, well, that's not going to fit, and then you end up with this back and forth. So I think maybe Figma handles that better, maybe than InDesign, whereas I think InDesign is a more just graphical tool. I'm not too familiar with the difference, so I don't know.
Do you mean like interactivity or?
I guess my lack of understanding of Figma was when I started using it. My assumption was that I could design in it and it'd give me HTML, and apparently I was way off.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work that
Because
way.
I see people do all these Figma designs. I've seen things shared, and then I'm like, oh, interesting. And then it's like, hold on, this is just a picture. Oh, yeah, it's just a picture. Which
Yeah,
it was a completely incorrect assumption on my part.
it doesn't do that. It's just a design tool. But it does have features, or it does have a feature where you can create some interactivity so that if you hand this off to a client, for example, you want them to get a feel for how the website navigates,
Oh, okay,
it can navigate from one page to
right.
another.
It's like a
So you can
prototype
have
kind of tool, right? Right.
a
Yeah,
prototype.
yeah,
Yeah, you can have links that are live, so to speak, and navigate the site. So it gives you a good sense of what navigation is going to be like.
right, right.
That you can do, but it won't do
No,
code for you. It
I
won't.
discovered this quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I guess
Uh,
it was just a poor assumption on my part. And then my question was, yeah, like, well, where does this fit into my process? Because at the moment it doesn't fit into my
mhm,
process at all. So it's like,
mhm.
do I change my process and learn to use that as okay, do this before I start coding? And I'm always keen to improve my process and technique. So it's like, okay, it's probably not a bad waste of an afternoon, right, to learn how to use
Yeah,
Figma.
yeah. And Figma has a YouTube channel with a
All right,
ton of videos.
cool,
Yeah, I'll see if I can. I probably have it bookmarked somewhere, and you can go in there and learn real quick the basics. They have a ton of videos on there.
cool.
Yeah, I think it would be good for you to become familiar with it. I find it that it's more useful when you have to show a design to someone,
Right.
like a
If
client
it's
or
working with
something
a
like
client or
that.
something, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, then you definitely can take advantage of it and show a client what a design will look like.
Before you go and
Um,
spend more time actually building it and fiddling.
yeah, Yeah, but with our own projects, sometimes that doesn't work to spend all that time just in design when you can once you get an idea. And that's why I was saying the way I use it is I start
Mm.
and I kind of get an idea, and once I kind of like what I see on Figma, I just leave it
Mm.
and jump onto coding and
Yeah.
designing in the browser. It's rare that I spend too much time in Figma for my own
Right.
stuff.
Okay.
I also use paper and
I
pencil
was
quite a
just
bit.
going to say there's an interesting tool. I don't know if it still exists, but when the very first iPhone came out, um, not very first, but when you could start writing applications for it, there was a prototyping tool that you took a photo of a sketch and you could effectively assign hot zones and say, okay, if
Oh.
you push this thing, transition to another sketch. And so you effectively created a prototype based on sketches on your POP, prototype on paper, I think it was called. And probably still exists or something like it. And so the one of the first iPhone apps I designed, I did that, and that was interesting because it was such a
Cool.
designing for such a different format was a big deal at that point in time, right? You know, responsive
Mm-hmm.
sites just didn't really exist, and trying to design for like 320 pixels when you be used to 1024 was like, oh god, you know, how I don't even know how I'm supposed to put things on a screen this small, whereas now it's,
Yeah.
you know, the opposite, right? um
Yeah.
so yeah, that was fun. I remember doing that. But yeah, especially again, if you're designing for different breakpoints, then being able to do that visually and try different things without having to fight with CSS is probably probably worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Let's see, where were we? I was telling you about the website.
Oh
And
yes, colors.
so I
That was
think
it. We got
that's,
distracted by colors.
yeah. Yes, that's right. Colors. I kept it simple still because I just want something that works good enough for now, that is aesthetically pleasing. But maybe later on, once I have revenue coming in, I can hire a designer and create something really nice. But for now, simple is good enough. Let's see what
You're gonna have to
else.
start getting clients soon. I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep harassing you about this each call. You're gonna have to start selling it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get there. I did onboard one more
Oh right,
podcaster.
cool. That's good.
Yeah, got some good feedback already from them, and I'm trying to get back to the product side of things to work on some of those. And
You're so close with the product, man. It's you're so close.
I know, but you know, this all of a sudden, for example,
This
today
auto
it was
record.
supposed to it was supposed to start recording automatically, and it didn't for you. And so now I'm thinking, what's going on? I need to go back and take a look at that.
It's
So
these little bugs. So I found one little thing on one edge case on dotplan last night, and it's driving me up the wall because I'm too busy to go and look at it. But it's like, I know if you push that button and it doesn't appear very often, but it's going to break, and it's really bugging me that it's like nobody's probably going to hit that button for, you know, anytime soon. But it's really bugging me now. Like that Sentry alert is just there in my email at the top, and I'm like, I don't know why that's not working. I have to go and debug. But
yeah,
I need that Stack Overflow AI code gen to go and fix it for me. Right.
oh yeah, right. I saw that.
That's got
Yeah,
implications. I'm not sure what's going to come of that, but that's a
yeah,
whole bunch of ethical and technical worms. They kind of worms they just opened, right? So
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
even want to think about that right now.
It looks very impressive,
Yeah,
and it looks like
it's a great
it. You
demo, right?
know,
Yeah.
it's a great demo, and I'm sure a ton of work went into it, AI powered and all that. But I don't know. It just makes me, I'm very skeptical when it comes to tools like that. Anything automated, at least judging by things that have come in the past,
I have
like,
problems getting syntax highlighting working sometimes, you know, so it screws up all
yeah,
the time. And I'm like, you know, if syntax highlighting can't work, is it going to write my
yeah,
code correctly for me?
yeah, yeah. And, you know, remember tools like Dreamweaver and, you know, all these tools that generate code for you, and you end up with a mess, or you end up with stuff that you still have to rewrite or remove, or, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I don't have much faith in these kinds of
I mean,
systems,
I
even
think
though
right.
now,
I think it's going to be it's super interesting to see and to as a like a taste of potential futures. But yeah, my more immediate reaction is like the ethics or the this has been trained on open source code. Suddenly, this whole clean room code thing is blurry. What happens? That there's a potential for like lots of backdoors to get learned. We already know that this is a real problem in the world already, and yeah, I'm less skeptical that it's not going to work. I think in certain cases it will probably work too well, maybe. I'm worried about the implications of it with relating to software development as a profession in terms of security and people taking shortcuts when probably they shouldn't, because we already know people do that if it's an option. So
Yeah.
and there goes any chance of code testing is like in terms of like interviewing. If people are doing like, oh yeah, write this code, and it's I'll just get the AI to write it for me, see if we can get to. Although that'd be an interesting bot, right? See how many jobs an AI bot could get based on code interviews.
Yeah,
I
right.
could get copy
Yeah.
AI to actually answer the interview questions and this thing to write the code for me and see if I can get a job at somewhere based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. Let's see what else. I think that's all I have on my end of things. Part of the website also, going back to the website, is I created a change log
Oh,
so
cool.
that I
Nice.
can record
Mm-hmm.
things
Yeah.
that change from version to version.
Nice.
And
Oh, nice. That looks good.
yeah.
You said you're using Statamic.
Yes, for the marketing site.
Nice.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I need to do some kind of a changelog thing as well, especially since we experimented with this at my previous place, and I forget the name of the. Did we use a service? I think we started using a service, and then we brought it in house because it's like we don't need like this is like a list of things.
Yeah.
And we had it in the UI as like a notification bell thing, which worked well as well, just because if you're adding a feature or changing some part of the UI, you want to draw attention to it without being too if it's out there on some other site somewhere, it's probably never going to get looked at so some way of showing it in the UI is probably where I want to go as well. I haven't gone down there yet. I'm still so I was looking at because onboarding is still I say work in progress. It's more of a massive overthinking in progress, I guess. And I found a site, something, I can't remember the name of it, but it basically does like reviews of onboarding for other sites. And it's super interesting to go through. And, he basically calls out patterns that they're using or like, just how people both in terms of sign up and the instruction process. And that's like, I think I've done too much and I just need to build it now. I've done too much research. Got to the point where I'm questioning every single thing I do now because it's like I've looked at too many examples and too many different ways of doing it that I'm like, I have no idea what's right anymore. It's just so again, I probably just need to do version 1 and then iterate based on how that feels to me, just because there's no standard way, right? So everybody does it differently, and some have pros and cons, and trying to come up with a hybrid of all of them is just, I don't have time for this. So I'm just going to do something.
For sure.
It's hard though. Again, especially with something like dotplan, that is one of the things that makes the onboarding difficult is that I'm not just telling you how to use the product. I'm telling you what you should be doing in the product. And that's the point which I keep sticking on is, I think I talked about it last time as well, is that, I don't feel confident enough in telling someone what they should be doing with their day. But I also want to present this in a way that makes them feel that there is a system to follow, right? So that's the bit which is just difficult to write. So, but again, I think I should probably just commit to what I've half done and then see how that goes, because it's better than what I have at the moment, which is nothing, which is me selling them an email saying this is what you probably should do.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea, to just commit to something and just stick to it. People will find ways to use the product. I mean, it's already happening where people are using it in different ways,
right.
And you can probably address that with your either documentation or knowledge base and screencasts, where you could potentially show different ways to use the product, like, different quick demos, and, you could use it like this, you could use it like that. But yeah, sticking to.
What are you using for your knowledge base, by the way? Something?
It's part of Outseta.
Oh, okay, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
part of Outsera.
all right.
And so I haven't done much there yet, but that's the plan.
Yeah, because we've been again. My wife has been working on Japanese like instructions effectively, and I'm like, okay, I
Hmm.
want to take this out. We've just been doing them on separate pages within what's the website thing using the landing page thing I'm using, and it's great because she can just go and create a web page and build this. I'm like, okay, it's now. There's enough content there that it makes sense to bring it into like a create a knowledge base based on that. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
shop around and see what options I have there.
Yeah.
Something that I would actually, this I've got to, don't try and make another side project, is I'd love a directory of indie alternatives, right? Because I know there's going to be somebody with a side project there that is $10 a month knowledge base that I would love to support. And I'm like,
Hmm.
you try and search for knowledge based software on Google, and or even alternative to, or whatever the review sites are, and there's just so many and they're so flooded by the big players that if someone was like, this is an indie, like this gets an official indie approval stamp of approval, then I'd be
Hmm.
like, yeah,
Hmm.
it may not be the most featureful or complex, but I would like to support the creators, right? So I need like an
Hmm.
indie directory, indie alternatives or something like that.
Yeah, that would be great. I wonder if Indie Hackers has anything like that,
I should have a look.
because
Yeah.
that's, seems like that would be something. I mean, people do have their projects on Indie Hackers because
Right.
you can create a profile
Yes.
for your project.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that's searchable
Yeah.
in
Yeah. I'll
some
go and poke
way.
around on indie hackers. That's probably a good place to start. But yeah, don't make it's just resist. Don't make it. Don't make it, Alan. It's too much work.
Yeah, you can't focus on that right now. Stay the course. Stay the course.
I'm so bad at I mean, as a side thing on that as well, it's amazing to me just how I think I've said before that ideas, working on something begets more ideas, and
Hmm.
when you start, if you're starting a project, you're like, I don't know what to build. As soon as you start building something, it's like a virus, and it just spreads all of these potential things you could build, right? Because you hit so many ideas and roadblocks or like challenges, and you're like, oh man, this should exist, and I wish I'd had that. And the list of potential projects just explodes, and
Yep.
it's amazing to me the same thing happens with like just opportunities and contacts as well, right? If somebody's looking at going freelancing or something, it's like, but I don't know who to, I don't have any clients or any contacts or anything, by just suddenly announcing and talking to people about what you're doing, like a side project or something like this, it's amazing how many people have just reached out to me about other work as well. And it's like, no, the whole point is I'm not doing that, right? I'm doing this. But
Yeah.
it's really again, I know this, but I'd kind of forgotten it by just being in the zone in terms of working for other people. I kind of,
Hmm.
to come back to this, and also to come back to this like 8 or 9 years later, just how much more there is as well. Like when I was more public about what I was building, 8 or 9 years ago, there was so many like requests for a coffee.
Yeah.
Brain picking as as a service, and but whereas now it's insane. There's just so much work and so many more people wanting to build things that
Hmm.
it's crazy. The moment you say you're building something, everyone's like, "Oh, we should talk," and I'm like, "No, I'm building my thing." Right? So it's, if there is anybody that's like on the fence of not knowing what to build or being scared about finding contacts and things, it's just like it's things
Oh,
happen the moment you start
uh,
them.
yeah. That reminds me, you had this other idea. You had this other
A business
idea
card thing.
with business
Yeah, yeah,
cards.
yeah. I did follow. That's progressing slowly, just
Okay.
because of time. But yeah, I kind of I demoed it to some people the other week, and they were all like, "Oh my god, where do I buy this?" And I'm like, okay, I really need to finish that up." It's a really easy sell, which is kind of surprising, right?
Tempting.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
It's so, yeah, I should get on that and get it out because it's working. It just needs wrapping up into a like product page, and now as I've got paddle access, that's a very good point. Now as I'm a paddle
oh, yeah.
approved person, then I could sell it, right? Interesting.
Do they have to approve the product itself
Probably
though?
yes, yeah. Because actually,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because this has no, it doesn't have a physical thing. It's just QR code, right? So I can,
Yeah.
yeah, I should check on that.
Yeah.
because if I'm sure if it's no big deal because it meets the same list of requirements as the as dot plans. So, interesting. Yeah, because that was one of my things. It's like just setting up billing is always like a little, but I guess once I've done it for one thing, it's easy to do for another, right?
Yeah. Just watch out for getting derailed,
Yeah, I know this
focusing on
is.
that instead of your
I know.
main project.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm just trying to, I'm having computer problems, so I'm on battery at the moment, and it's just down to
Okay.
5%. So I'm just gonna see if I don't know if
Oh
it's
yeah.
gonna.
No worries.
Yeah,
No
let me
worries.
just find a. What's the easiest way to do this? Maybe if I plug this in. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that will work. So yeah, I can't run my. I can't. Oh, hold on. It's gonna pause for a minute while it does something.
All right.
I don't know what it's doing. Everything's just hung, so I can hear you, but I can't see anything.
There you go. It's
Am I
back.
back? Am I back?
I can see you and I can hear you.
I've got black screens at the moment, so here we go. You're over
Ah,
there. So
there we
yeah, my 16-inch MacBook Pro. I don't know whether it's the heat or what, but I can't run the internal monitor and the external monitor at the same time without it overheating.
Oh, wow. I see. Can you hear me?